right, happy Thursday, students. So today, this is going to be real quick. I want to go over the FRQ concept application that we did last week, both questions, and I'm going to give you some tips and tricks here for the test on Monday. So let's jump into it. So first of all, overall, students did well on both FRQs. Okay, however, there were common problems. So, and these problems are pretty easily fixed. So I'm glad we did a couple of these practice ones before the test. So make sure you're watching this whole video and pay attention because this is going to really help you on the test on Monday. Okay, and just in your writing in general. So again, like I said, overall students did well. Not everybody did well, but most everybody did well. However, there's common problems. So let's go over what some of these common problems were. Part A. So Part A will not always be answered directly in this scenario. So a lot of the ones I've given you early in the year, you just had to, the scenarios came out and said it, and you just needed to find it and identify it. These two FAQs did not do that. You had to kind of deduce the answer. You had to look at the information in the question, in the scenario, and try to determine what institution behavior they were talking about, okay? So let's look at the first one here. So in this description, I'm not going to read this whole thing because it's just a waste of time. This morning, Secretary Napolitano announced new action my institutions will take to amend our nation's immigration policy to make it more fair, more efficient, and more just, okay? So if you read this whole scenario, you can clearly tell President Obama is not signing a law but that was made by Congress, right? He's not talking about a Supreme Court decision that was made. So looking at what he's talking about, knowing what you know about presidential powers, you had to deduce what power he was talking about. So Part A says, describe the presidential power exhibited in the announced policy. Okay? Describing means more than identifying. You can't. It doesn't say identify. The answer is executive order. A is executive order. Okay, but you have to describe it. This is key. This is a key word right here. A lot of you just said, you just stated it. You identified it. If all you said was the power being exhibited is executive order, that's not enough because if it said identify, that would have been enough. But it says describe. Okay, you see here it says describe. So you have to describe what that power is. Okay, an executive order is a action by the president that basically allows him to have the power to make policy that carry the weight of laws. These executive orders were not written in the Constitution, but they allow the president to carry out policy when he can't work with Congress. Okay, something like that, describing executive orders. What's their constitutionality? What are they? What are they used for? So you got to describe it. You can't just identify it. Okay, part B, question B says, in the context of the scenario, always answer in the context of the scenario. A lot of you are answering these questions separate from the context of the scenario. Every answer in these questions has to be related to the scenario that they're given. Okay, you couldn't say, you couldn't say something that's not related to the scenario. So B, in the context there, explain how the use of the power that described part A can be affected by interactions between the president and Congress. Okay, well, you could say something like, Congress can write a law that circumvents an executive order, something like that. So you have to say some way of how Congress can affect an executive order. Okay, that's what the question is asking. Explain how the use of the power described in an executive order can be affected by interactions between the president and the Congress. Okay. Part C, in the context there, explain how the interaction between the president and Congress can be affected by the media. So this question, they're asking you, how can the media affect this relationship? Obviously media can influence public opinion. They can influence the actions of government, and that's what this part of the question is getting at. So you make sure you're paying close attention to these verbs. Describe. Okay, make sure if it says identify, you identify. If you describe, you describe. Okay, so I'm going to show you a sheet of all the possible verbs they could put onto the test, not onto the test, but on the FRQ application part. Okay, use detail. Something not explained or described enough. Like I said, some of you just identified, you didn't describe or explain if that's what the question was asking. Okay, so let's look at. Make sure you use complete sentences. People were handing in stuff that was not in complete sentences, which is crazy. I don't know if it's just out of laziness or what, but you have to use complete sentences, complete college level writing on the argumentative essay and on this FRQ part of the test. You have to write college level. There should be no reason at this point as 11th graders that you're turning in anything with incomplete sentences, especially when it's an assignment like this. Okay, That wasn't common. I'm not saying, a lot of people did it, but when more than, a handful of students are turning in stuff with incomplete sentences, it has to be addressed. Okay. So let's look at these verbs that College Board that could possibly be on this FRQ. College Board put this out. I'm going to put it into a Google Doc, and it's going to be, you guys can have it right in front of you on the test. I would suggest printing it out and having it ready for Monday. So let's look at, these are the different verbs that could be in this FRQ. So task verbs used in free response questions. These are only the words that are going to be used that you're going to have to do. You're going to have to compare or possibly define, possibly describe, develop an argument. That's in the argumentative part, not the concept application. Same with draw a conclusion. Explain and identify. You have to understand the differences between these verbs, okay? So because when they grade your essays, basically the rubric for the concept application, which they haven't even released a rubric to teachers, which is crazy. So I'm trying to teach you guys this without any rubric because they haven't released one. But when they do make a rubric, what they're going to do, these words are going to be kind of essential to getting your points. So if you define or if you identify instead of explaining, or if you, if you just define it instead of draw a conclusion, something like that, you got to make sure that you're adhering to the verbs that they're using. So if it says explain, explain. If it says describe, describe. I don't know what the difference between those two words are, but right here they explain what the difference is. Okay? Just pay super close attention to those verbs. This paper right here is going to be super important to help you make sure you're answering it correctly. Okay? Now, really important here. They just kind of threw this at us this week, which is crazy. They're changing kind of the test just a week before it's actually happening, which is nuts. But we're going to roll with it. You guys are going to do great. So the FRQ this year will have two verbs in some parts of the question. Okay, before A, B, and C, you would only see one of those verbs. Now this year, to prevent a preventative measure against cheating and to limit your time to look up answers, you have to do. They're going to put two of these verbs in the questions. Okay, so A, B, and C. For part A, you might have to identify and explain. For part B, you might need to explain and describe, or explain and compare. They're going to be using two of these verbs, okay, that we just talked about. So make sure that you're being aware of that so you're not surprised come Monday, okay? So guys, that's all I have for you today. Make sure that you're continuing to study. Make sure that you are using all those methods that I have listed to help you.